Hello, everyone. Welcome to this IT Live session by Global Links. My name is Manuel Garcia. I'm the operations manager for Global Links in the US. One of the concepts that is becoming a trend in the DevOps world is that of observability. Observability means having visibility and transparency throughout the DevOps ecosystem. This is very important because in order to obtain valuable feedback from ops to dev, which is one of the three ways in DevOps, observability must become a reality. And this is precisely what we want to discuss today. We invited Jack Marr, DevOps and Digital Transformation Consultant, and Richard Haas, who is Director of Global Product Marketing for DevOps at ServiceNow. In this presentation, Jack will walk us through a 5-minute Ignite to introduce the subject, and then Richard will show us a demo on how we can achieve observability using the tools that most IT organizations currently have. Through this presentation, questions are open through the chat on YouTube. If you are watching us on YouTube, please post your questions on the chat that you see there, and we'll be sharing some of those questions on the screen. And also at the end of Richard's presentation, we will have a section to answer some of the questions that are left that you sent throughout the presentation. So please interact with us. This is intended to be a community event. So anything that you have to say, please post it on the chat and we will be sharing that with the audience. So thank you for being with us. And with that said, I'll pass it on to Jack.
Thank you, Manuel. We're here today to talk about visibility in our software pipelines. Visibility is incredibly important and growing in importance to our organizations as we realize just how tightly entwined our technology and business operations have become. Visibility, oops, I forgot to start my timer. Visibility is what enables us to be able to be aware of what's actually happening in our organizations and focus on those things that are most important to us. This has been a challenge in a lot of cases just because of the number of things that were going on and how deeply buried they've been in our organizations. We really didn't have any real opportunity to see what was going on. Once we attain visibility through technology, which is becoming increasingly available to us, the next challenge, or maybe one that we can even begin to address before we address visibility, is what we're actually going to be able to see. Transparency into what we do and how we're doing in the execution and delivery of the value creation and delivery tasks that we're responsible for are the basis for being able to understand what's going on and why and how it's working the way it should. That transparency of process is also core to being good at communicating what we're doing and focusing on those things that are the most important to the bigger picture for our organization. As the number and types of information and data become available to us, this becomes increasingly more of a challenge. And we've seen things like dashboards pop up to help facilitate that observability into those areas in which we had some degree of transparency. The next level as we combine these things is to attain observability. Observability is when we can look at what's going on without having to focus on a particular item to understand what it is. In order to make that work, we really need to have a model for what our business operations should be. In many cases, we have this, but it may not be formalized to the point where we could lay it out for communications. As we lay out that model, we can then identify those places where we need more information about what's going on. And adding telemetry to our applications and our environment enables us to see what's going on and gives us the context for what's going on right now, along with our expectations and what we should anticipate, and focus on the performance of those things we care about. In order to get to that, a lot of times we focus on, or one of the more useful tools has been the use of value stream mapping, understanding how value flows through our organization and the way we leverage the resources available to us enables us to then be able to manage those processes. And there's a growing body of tools that enable us to address value stream management. Value stream management is really focused on those items that are directly aligned with our core mission and our defining values so that we can align our resources with those for the best outcomes and the most focus on those things that are important to us. Now, in doing this, there are a lot of opportunities to buy new tools and to add technology. And as technologists, we love playing with those new tools. But the reality is many of us already have a lot of the tools that we'll need in order to accomplish this. So rather than running out and getting a demo and buying new tools, we should probably take a look at what we currently have, because we may have what we need to be successful in that. The focus of that enables us then to address the capabilities that are most important to us, to layer in those ones that are missing or fall short, so that we can focus them on the outcomes that are really important to us. A big part of this transition will be moving from the KPI approach, those pieces of data that are not necessarily important in and of themselves, but indicators or directional or maybe a bellwether to our performance, are where we've started and in aggregate may help us get there. But the real focus should be on the outcomes that we aspire to. And maybe we align those KPIs with those outcomes. But identifying and being able to measure the outcomes that we care about, the realization of the value that we are here to create and deliver, is the most important part. So focusing on those tools, addressing what our business operations should be, enabling our organizations to see what's happening in a visual way with context, enables us to be much better aligned with assigning our resources and focusing our work on those things that are most important to us, which will become the path to being more successful. I think I beat my 5-minute target, Manuel.
Boss, Director of Global Product Marketing for DevOps at ServiceNow, who's going to walk us through this demo on how the DevOps tool from ServiceNow can help us to achieve this concept of observability. Go ahead, Richard. Welcome.
Thank you, Manuel. Thanks for the welcome. Thank you, Jack, for that intro as well. That's a really great summary of kind of the topic we're going to talk about, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to join you here today. I am sharing. Let me just share my slides properly. Yeah, you're seeing my screen right now. So here we go. Yeah, I really want to touch on some of the points. You'll notice I don't have a 5-minute timer. You're going to get a little bit more of my voice, and Jack, feel free to jump in with commentary as we go through too. But what I wanted to do was just share some of the experience that we've had from a ServiceNow point of view. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with ServiceNow. For those that are not, you may have at least have heard the name and probably know us more for kind of the operations side of the business. And I think that really ties back to what Jack was saying about defining and managing the model for the business and the operations. A lot of people do that in ServiceNow. So what we see in the DevOps environment is if we can connect to what people are already doing in DevOps, then we can really help provide that visibility and the kind of end-to-end insights that people are looking for. So that's what I plan to go through in the next 20 minutes or so. Feel free to add questions as we do that, and I'm happy to stop and discuss any of these points. I'm going to start with just some very simple things that are probably pretty obvious already. First is that pretty much everyone is driving to DevOps, right, or to some kind of product-centric application delivery model. Many of you have probably seen Mick Kirsten's book about going from project to product. It's a very common activity that everyone is kind of adopting. We're seeing this certainly across our customer base. Everyone adopting DevOps in some form or another. And they're aiming for the ability to not just get that better visibility across the whole DevOps pipeline, but also thinking, or the whole delivery pipeline, but also looking at how quickly they can iterate, how they can be more responsive to the business. And so the rapid iteration is a key part of what people are aiming for. Not everyone's going to get to multiple releases per day. In fact, most organizations we're working with, which tend to be larger organizations or more complex organizations, are still working in release cycles where they group changes up together into maybe a release once a month, even multiple months to get releases out. But the overall goal is more rapid change, faster iterations and things like that. So there's some challenges though that we think that we're seeing in our client base, and I'm sure you're seeing some of these too. The DevOps teams, while they themselves tend to get very good at working rapidly and iterating in short cycles, they have to fit into a broader set of processes that the company has already adopted. And one of the key things Jack said in his intro is you do not want to have to throw out any investment you've made in things like governance, which is a key area for most organizations today, right? Most people are under some kind of regulation, whether you're in a heavily regulated industry like finance or healthcare, or whether you're just a larger organization perhaps that has privacy and other things that they have to be careful of, or of course anything that's sort of business critical, you need to be very cautious in terms of how those changes get out into production. A lot of organizations, again, have been using ServiceNow as a way to manage that change. I'm sure you've got other processes and tools that you might be using as well. But that's a challenge, right? Bringing DevOps teams into that process. And Jack alluded to this too. Of course, you've had this notion of fragmented data. The whole process of delivering something into production requires a lot of different tools. There are hundreds of DevOps tools out there, of course. We're starting to see some consolidation and some adoption of platforms. But you still find that as different teams spring up around different organizations, they tend to start using different tool sets, and then you get a problem of how do you pull that information together across multiple teams. It's kind of another factor of complication in looking at all that data. So that visibility across teams becomes a big challenge. Thanks, Suma, for the comment. I'm appreciating that. This is the right kind of topic. So I'm going to focus one piece of this about the change process. I know we're thinking about insights, but one of the things about this is also, the focus on automating what you're trying to do from a DevOps point of view. We've seen a lot of success of that in recent times in terms of test automation, those kinds of things. But the governance side has always been a challenge for DevOps. Again, particularly as you scale up across multiple teams or to larger, more important projects in the company. And the change process, for those of you familiar with service management and the typical way this is done, somebody has to go and create a change ticket. They get some kind of approval process. Maybe it goes into a change advisory or a change approval board. That gets some kind of approval. This can take days. Historically, this used to be weeks. People have got a lot better about this with standard changes and other things that you can do. But in any case, this is a difficult, sometimes difficult and sometimes slow process. So one of the options that we feel we can bring, and one of the things that people really came to us for on the ServiceNow side, is how do we automate this process and completely change the way we do change from a governance point of view. So I'm going to touch on that and how we do that. So, you might not know or recognize ServiceNow as a DevOps company until maybe a year or so ago when we really got into this field. But what we think that we can do is connect the workflows and all of the management that we're already doing in ServiceNow to the tool chains that our customers are already using. Again, leverage the investment you already have, leverage the development tools you already have. Developers don't like having to change tools. We're not going to impose new tools on you. We're going to connect to the key steps of the pipeline that you already have. So that means connecting ServiceNow to the planning tools and having some replication within ServiceNow of the work items, the user stories that you might have in Jira or boards in Azure DevOps and things like that. Secondly, we're going to then connect to the next stage, which is where the developers commit code, whether that's GitHub or Bitbucket or other repositories. We want to understand when code is checked in, who made the change, what kind of changes were made, and bring that information into ServiceNow as well. And then as the pipeline is executing, whether that's Jenkins or Azure DevOps pipeline or GitLab, any of the pipelines, then we want to know, what tests were run, what were the results of those tests. We'll connect to the test tools as well and bring in that information directly. But really get a lot of data about what's happening through the pipeline until we get to the point in the pipeline where there's some kind of deployment going to take place, or at least plan to take place. And that's where a change process or a governance process needs to kick in. And that typically for us would be a change record, a change ticket. And again, historically, we would ask a developer to log into ServiceNow, create that change ticket, and provide all the necessary information. Well, the fact now that we can connect to all of the DevOps tools means we can pull all that information in automatically. We can recognize when some kind of push to an environment that we care about is going to happen. And so we will first of all gather all that data, and when the push is getting ready to happen, we can automatically then create that change ticket. Developer never has to get involved in that process. Now, the other thing now that actually ServiceNow introduced a year or so ago was the notion of policies around change. So you can define a lot of that governance policy in a change process itself. And so if we have the data, we can match it against the policy, and we can determine whether we can automatically approve the change. And the idea here is to automatically approve as many of the DevOps changes as possible, 90+% of the DevOps changes. You still might want some kind of more rigorous process in the background in case of something not matching in the policy, so that the ability to go through a manual approval. You might want other change capabilities like assessing a change against other changes that might be happening for risk purposes or something like that, or grouping changes together into a change window. Some organizations still need to do that. You're not necessarily going to be automatically putting everything out into production, the moment it's approved. So that all of those kind of processes will still be available as part of the change capability that ServiceNow brings. But the idea now that we've connected all of this together and brought all of that information in, you could probably start to see really gives us the idea about where we get our reporting and insights from for the whole process, to really give that visibility across the end-to-end chain. The other thing you'll probably know, if you know anything about ServiceNow, is we have a lot of the operational information already in the system. So again, if we can connect that to that whole stream, then we've got a significant amount of valuable information that we can share. So that's what we're aiming to do. And it makes the change process more like this, right? The change gets created automatically. We've gathered the risk data as part of that pipeline process. We can do some evaluation of that and validate against policy, and then automatically go back to the DevOps tools and say that's okay. You can continue through the rest of the pipeline. So what the developer will see is not a lot, actually. They'll see their pipeline pause for a moment, perhaps while it's in Jenkins or something like that. But then it'll come back with the approval to continue. Or if there is something else, maybe we communicate through Slack or Teams or something like that to help the developer understand what other steps they might need to take to get the approval to go through. So it becomes a completely, or almost completely, potentially completely transparent process. Keep the developer in the tools that they're using, and allow them to focus more on the coding activities rather than the administration capabilities or activities. So I wanted to give an example of one of the companies we've been working with, which is a bank in Norway called DNB. And I like this for a number of different reasons. One is, first of all, Kristen Nace, who put this together for the bank, was very much focused on the people and process side of bringing development and operations together. So was really very much aware of that, the challenges and nuances of doing that. And obviously working with global links, you can get an idea of the kind of capabilities they have in helping you to do that as well. The other thing I really liked about DNB was, first of all, they see this as an audit solution. The ability to bring together all of this information gives you that perspective. We can now connect the planning from the beginning. So what user story was used to start off this piece of work. We know which developer made the change, what lines of code were changed and files were touched as part of the change. We know what tests were run, which we link again to all of these other pieces, and the results of those tests, including security and code scans and things like that. So now we have that end-to-end chain. We also now know, because of the other operations activity of what ServiceNow is doing, what is happening to that product in production, in the production environment. So we know if there are incidents against that activity, that piece of code. We know if there are issues raised in the help desk. And so we see that complete end-to-end capability. So that has two other implications. One is in remediation. Now we know all the way back. We can step back and say, well, these lines of code were changed because of this particular reason, and that ties to this incident. And the change request caused that incident. We have that linkage for remediation. So rapid remediation becomes easier to do. And then the other piece of that is, during the actual change assessment, we can leverage all of that data end to end. So we can understand whether there are currently open incidents against this service before we go ahead and make the approval. Maybe we'll say if there's an open incident, then we should pause the pipeline for a little longer while somebody else takes a look at what the change is. Is the change trying to fix that incident? Okay, we'll let it through. But if it's some other some innovation change, then maybe we need to hold that up until we fix the incident first. So that's a key part of those kind of insights and the connection and the automation. And then the last piece that I really like about the DMB story is they understand that developers are kind of fixed within their environments. They have different teams that use different tools, but they want to encourage a certain type of behavior. That's things like which CI/CD tools from a selection are being used. So those kinds of things, you could use this capability to suggest to developers, if you go down this path, if you use these tools, if you fill out these forms appropriately the first time, not that you're going to be doing a lot of form handling in this, but doing those kinds of activities that we would prefer, then we can automate the process. We'll give you direct access almost to production because we'll give you this kind of automated governance process. So that's the other key aspect of what they're trying to do. One of the things they found from this is the amount of time you can save developers from the administrative part of the work. They don't have to log into a system, create a ticket, and wait for a change activity to occur. They just continue in their tools as normal. And I'll show you this in a bit of a demo in a second. I'll show you how that kind of looks. They're just continuing their tools as normal. So let me step into the demo next, actually. So again, what we do is we connect ServiceNow, the bottom half of this picture, to the various DevOps tools in the tool chain that the developers are using. So what that means is, so I'm using an Azure DevOps example here, and you do this with Jira and other tools too. Actually, this might be a Jira example. But in any case, the idea is that the developer picks up the piece of work from their incoming list of items that they need to work on, their user stories. And in this case, they've got to add a careers tab to a user interface. Pretty straightforward. So now they go into GitHub, their repository, and they are going to start to write the code. They'll make the change, and eventually they'll commit the change. And one of the behaviors actually you like to do in committing, and it depends on your environment and whether you automate this or use this or not. But one of the things you might want to do is make sure when a developer commits a change, they tie it back to the user story. And that might be an action that you want them to take. And this is one of the things that we're going to understand in the reporting. We're going to measure these kind of actions, and we can report on that to help you understand, how well the developers are really following the guidelines that we'd like them to follow. Again, this kind of carrot approach to encouraging them to the best behaviors that you want to see. So they're committing the change and into the GitHub repository in this case, and we will capture that action as well. We even capture the lines of code that were changed. So behind the scenes, what's happening in ServiceNow is we're creating records in our environment we will group this around a work item record that allows us to understand what the commits were, and we're starting to connect all of those commits to the work items. The developer doesn't see this, they don't have to do anything. This is just done through the integration with the product and happens automatically at that commit action. So when they get into their Jenkins, in this case, pipeline, then their pipeline just runs through as normal. You might imagine that in the UAT test stage in this pipeline, it's a short pipeline, it might have gone through completely automatically, but still gone out to ServiceNow, created a change ticket, gone through some policy to automatically check that everything was okay to go into test, and then come back to the pipeline and continued into test. Now, it might also be that there are some other actions and we'd pause the pipeline at that point. We might also, as you go into deployment, have some more stringent policy that might actually pause the pipeline for a little longer while we go into some additional checks, or we might have a manual step. And again, what that looks like in ServiceNow is we're modeling the pipeline within our data model in ServiceNow. So we understand everything that's happened up to this point, and we go in and we automatically create the change request when this push to production request starts to happen, and as our looking at the policy and comparing all the data that we brought in to determine whether we can automate that or not. And in, again, most cases, we completely automate it. So that's really what we're aiming for, to show that kind of end-to-end automation. The key piece of this now is, of course, we've got all this data that we have connected end-to-end across the entire environment. So the types of insights and visibility that you can get to that, the transparency into that data is what's really kind of a key takeaway from this activity. So one example of this, I'm sure many of you have read the Accelerate book and familiar with the DORA research that Dr. Nicole Forsgren and others have done. You might be familiar with the 4 key KPIs. That's one of the dashboards that we put together based on this information. And the great thing about this is, you think about a key KPI like change failure rate. Again, we know when we've put something or approved for something to go into production because we had the change record that we created automatically from that pipeline. We also know if it failed in production because we're handling the operations side through our ITOM and IT service management products. So we can create these or manage these kinds of insights directly for you based on that information. So you can get insights like change failure rate very easily and with very little kind of additional integration. There's no additional work involved in terms of putting these kind of statistics together. So those kind of insights become much easier to do. The other thing I would say, I'll just give you an example of a couple of the other dashboards here. So, one of the things you want to do is you're deploying this kind of solution and thinking about the whole value stream end to end, and how you're measuring it and managing it is, how are we comparing to the manual processes that we had before, or whatever process we had before we got into this this capability. And so things like measuring the rate of change, which changes are now accelerated through an automated process versus go through a manual process, and understand why you had to go through a manual process, starting to really drill down into the value stream to understand where the bottlenecks are. This kind of report gives you those kind of insights as well. There's a couple of another example in here about the development performance. How many, what's the frequency of our commits, the sort of branches per repository, these kinds of insights that you might want to need across your development environment. And a key thing here is we can do the same kind of insights across different types of tools. So one of the other challenges of scaling up a DevOps environment is that different teams tend to start picking different tools. Now you might, again, try and encourage a specific platform, but what we found is, particularly as people are getting started, and most people are still in the kind of getting started stage that we're finding at the moment, you will see one set of tools using Jira and Jenkins, one team or one group using Jira and Jenkins, another group using Azure DevOps, maybe somebody else is using GitLab. We can normalize the information that's coming across these. So that transparency and the insights that you want to get across those different teams can be brought together in one place. So that's kind of the summary of what I said, and we can share these slides with people beyond this afterwards as well. For those that know a bit more about ServiceNow, I'll do a quick touch on the sort of mechanics of how we do this, because the important thing here is, how do you automatically approve a change? That's the key piece we want to do. We're gathering all this data for the visibility, but how do you automatically approve the change? It's based on policy. So you bring our inputs into the policy, and that's anything that ServiceNow can see. And when you think about it, we're becoming this huge workflow engine that's used in a lot of different business units and capabilities, human resources and customer service, and all kinds of different areas. So we have a lot of insights to different information, and it could be things like incidents I mentioned earlier coming in from the operation systems. It could be the development tool data that we have, but pretty much anything we see can be a part of these inputs. And then from that, you decide, you create these decisions as to what you're going to do versus what inputs you need to understand whether something can be automatically approved or may go through a manual step, or maybe it's something that just should be rejected immediately. So those kind of decisions come out of that. And then here is where you define all of that different capability for building those rules. It can get very sophisticated if you want it to. It can also be very simple. And in fact, one of the other options you can have right now is you can actually just log the change and not even apply any kind of policy to it. That's something we're just introducing into this pipeline. So if all you need to do is log that activity, then we have that capability as well. Make it very simple. So I've gone through that very quickly, but I thought it would be great to at least show you a little bit of what we can do there. There's a lot of follow-up opportunity here in terms of showing you more of what ServiceNow can do, and obviously what Global Links can do, and I'll let Jack talk more about that. But I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the experiences we've had. I've got a couple of customer experiences we could talk about, but Jack, I don't know if you have any other thoughts you wanted to start with. You're on mute, Jack, right now.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to take advantage of my unfair advantage here and ask you questions while others are formulating theirs. One of the things you said was around the automated approvals and ticket completions. That sounds really great. But how are organizations reacting to that? And I'm thinking specifically from the perspective of governance, regulatory, and compliance folks. Are they on board with this? And how does that even get started, or how does that happen in your experience?
Well, that's a great question. And what I like about this is when you think about DevOps, we're really trying to pull all the teams together, right? To have the risk teams involved in the whole process. And that's been a challenge. And as you say, they could have some concerns, particularly as you're talking about, I'm going to automate a change request. I'm going to give a developer access to production, essentially, right? Because I'm going to say that he or she can get something through just based on some policy. So I think there's a couple of things there. I was talking with one customer, it was a large financial institution, and they were saying they had this question from the auditors. They were having this discussion with the risk management team. And they ended up concluding that it was actually a better process to go through automated change than the older manual change process they had before. And the reason for that was twofold. One was we're actually gathering all of that data automatically. So we're not asking a developer to type a form in or something like that. We're going to pick up, all of these different pieces that we need automatically from that. So that's one aspect of it. The second one was they started to look at how could they include the risk policies in that change policy. So, in ServiceNow, we have a product called GRC that helps us manage risk policies. We can take data from that as feed in to the policy that we're using on the change side. So that's the other way they looked at that and have determined that it's actually a better way to go. Just the one third part to that, or another point is, if you have some kind of overall risk policy management, again, we have this GRC thing in ServiceNow that does this. You can apply that to the same end-to-end process. So you're making sure, for instance, that somebody who requests a change is not the same person who approves the change. So there's sort of another layer externally that you can apply to that whole process that people do. So it comes up a lot, that risk profiling.
You bet. And I love what you were saying about most of that. My experience has been similar in some regards. Some organizations have a really difficult regulatory environment that isn't really ready to adopt these kinds of practices. For our background, when I was working on this topic with a financial services organization, we had a lot of success in just beginning the conversation of, I don't know if we're really solving all of your problems, and I think we could do a better job of helping you attain your goals, which caught their attention, right? Not very many folks have that approach when they go talk to internal audits in particular. I also really love the fact that you've got this full scope view, and the GRC component, which I wasn't previously aware of, I think will probably help provide the credibility that you're using the right kind of language and doing the right kinds of things, which might really further this conversation as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just makes that whole conversation with the risk team that much easier. And they're not an afterthought. They're not a separate, team that are, scrutinizing your policies or something later. They're part of that discussion and a part of the whole process, which is great. Yeah, very cool.
Right. I want to refer to some of the questions that have come in from online as well. So especially around Suma's question, right? So integrating the tools, and I think this is particularly interesting. And this is a phrase I never thought I'd say, that I'm excited about ServiceNow. In that most of this has been from the development perspective and really pushing it to the operations part of our organization. And this is really a neat opportunity from, the 800-pound gorilla in the IT service management and operations space of reaching out and driving that collaboration from your perspective. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, and it came from the friction that used to or could exist, right, between development and operations. And you know, the classic DevOps story of why you're trying to bring these teams together is because you don't want developers throwing everything over the wall to operations and having those issues. So the fact that we can help bring this together, yeah, is a key. It is exciting, I think. Yeah, it's a complete change to be able to automate the process completely and get these kind of insights. So I like Suma's question here about the necessary steps to take and integrating with the DevOps tools. And let me just start with the second part here about specific CI/CD tools. The way we've approached this is, first of all, to build obviously some key integrations with the major tools that are out there. So for CI/CD, it's Jenkins, it's Azure DevOps pipelines, and YAML pipelines, and GitLab as the common ones that the most common ones that we start with. But the way we built this, and the reason we work with a lot of partners as well, is that we've opened up the APIs and the models that we use to do that. So if there's a CI/CD tool that you're using, Circle CI or something like that, that we don't have yet, or that we may have in the future, then it's relatively straightforward to add that into as an integration like we have. So in terms of steps, I wouldn't say there's a lot of change required. Again, what we really want to do is make you leverage the investment you've already made in the pipelines and the way you've built them. So in terms of getting ready for integration, it's really kind of understanding that there are some teams that are better or more easily automated in terms of the change process. Maybe it's a less complicated or less impactful product before. That's the way to get started and to sort of experiment with the process. But it's actually very straightforward. You know, again, we're just connecting to what they already have. We're not asking for a huge amount of change. There's a little bit of change in the pipelines potentially to make sure that we get the call into ServiceNow. But even there, we've been getting better at how we query or integrate with the pipeline to put in the pieces that we need to make those calls into ServiceNow. So again, it's leveraging what you had already as much as possible.
And connecting those dots, right? It's not just what we put into production, but how is it responding over time as well?
Yeah, and the first time we show people this, when we bring up the records and we show, look, we can show you the talk about connecting the dots, right? The user story that created this piece of work in the first place. Here's the developer that made the change and the code and the actual lines of code. We'll show you through a ServiceNow report if you want the lines of code, or you can click on a link and go into the repository. The lines of code that were changed, the CI/CD pipeline that was run and the results from that pipeline, the change record that was created in ServiceNow, the operational activity associated with that service, because we're mapping this to services again within the ServiceNow model. So, and actually that brings up another quick point I'd love to make, because when we think about what a lot of companies are going through now is modernization as well, right? Moving into the cloud, moving into new technologies that they might not have had in the past. And this applies to you, whatever size of company you are. It's a challenge. There's a lot of new tools, and the speed at which things are happening is way faster than it was in the past. So being able to do that kind of mapping to a service, which, in the past we talk about a CMDB, that we're modernizing beyond that these days, but you need some kind of mapping to the business services. Now we can start to automate all of that mapping as well. So we know, in the same way as infrastructure as code, you can think of mapping as code, right? For business services. We can do API calls or whatever you need to do to actually build that service on the fly as it's being, built by the development team. So that from an operational and management point of view, however sophisticated you want to get there, you've still got all the necessary connectivity and data. So those connecting the dots is a key capability, key requirement that we need to fulfill.
You bet. And I want to tie that back into something we just talked about a moment ago, and that is the regulatory and compliance environment. Mm-hmm. In conversations that I've had with auditors, both internal and external, there are a couple things that they're always looking for. Right. A big part is how are we controlling our processes, and how are we sure that the controls that we've put in place are working, that they're actively being used, and we don't have things that are happening outside of that.
Yep. And
the automation of those processes and creating that fastest, smoothest path that is along the governance and compliance path, and automating that makes it much easier for folks to do that. From an auditability perspective, it adds, and especially with some of the things you talked about regarding the end-to-end data collection and visibility that you can offer, showing an auditor how this path has been automated, enabling them to have the visibility that here's how the controls are operated. Because they are automated, it is by definition in compliance. And we will, of course, need to give people the opportunity to override the system when there's a specific need. But that then creates this red flag. It becomes very obvious and easy for the auditors then to review those transactions or activities that are manual and therefore suspect, right? And so that enables this much better discussion and frees the auditors to focus less on finding that proverbial needle in the haystack and focusing on just those things that are likely to become issues.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can show, first of all, we have a strong process, right? And you can map out the process and show how it's connected and where the data comes from. And secondly, as you said, right, you can show consistency of data. There aren't those anomalies. We're automatically collecting the information, or it can be done across the pipeline. And I, again, talking to actually a large bank, and this applies, it's not just large organizations, right? I mean, a lot of people can be subject to regulatory controls, but they're a global bank, so they're audited a lot in different locations. So they were saying something like, we're basically essentially always being audited, right? It's actually like 10 to 12 times a year, but they're always working on an audit. So the amount of time they put into audit, the audit process, and whether they have to bring in developers or not to answer questions is critical, right? It's a lot of work, takes a lot of time and hours, takes developers away potentially from the work they're doing, or it generally involves pulling in people from other teams. So as much as you can minimize that, as much as you said, as you can show the auditors that you have the good process in place, then yeah, it's a big win. And again, why people get excited about the ability to connect all this together.
So ServiceNow obviously has a great opportunity to provide insights into what's happening from an infrastructure and operations perspective, and increasingly across that entire technology value stream. Is ServiceNow intended to be sort of the hub for all of this, or is it in a feeder role for other kinds of applications? What's the best way to use ServiceNow? There's so many capabilities.
Well, yeah, there are, and it's a great question, and I think my general or first answer would be I'd see us much more as a hub for all of this work, because we're a workflow-based company, right? And we're already connecting a lot of different pieces of work and work activities across an organization. And again, it could be in areas beyond, IT in the pipeline. It could be other business areas as well. And obviously, selfishly, from a ServiceNow point of view, I think the more you put into the platform and the more you connect to the platform, the more you get out of it. But that's not necessarily always the case. You may have some other platform that you're using for some other aspect where you need the information that ServiceNow has. And obviously, we have the great capabilities, REST APIs and things to share that. So there are circumstances where we might be the source of information, maybe something that we've improved upon by gathering into ServiceNow and combining it with something else. But I think over time, certainly connecting to the other platforms you have, I would see ServiceNow more as the hub for that, and for value stream management more generally. Right now, we're very focused on the DevOps pipeline and technology delivery in terms of the value stream, but I could see that very, very easily growing into other areas and again, connecting to the other parts of the workflow. One of the things you hear about from ServiceNow recently, if you've been watching us at all, is this notion of not just a software factory, but how we leverage the information that ServiceNow can connect to drive more value beyond the technology pieces that we tend to integrate with. So we talk about not so much a CMDB anymore, but a service graph, we call it, which is all of the data that we have, not just business process and business capability mapping and things like that. It's much more about the whole end-to-end view that we can share, where we can share data. So, yeah. pretty amazing insights.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the fact that this also, and I think where you, if I can summarize a little bit of that, I love that you have the ability to be that single source of the truth and can be either the hub or, primary access point or the feeder. And that enables folks to use the tools that make the most amount of sense for them. And as we see a continuing maturity in value streams and looking at value in different ways, such as a GRC value stream, for example, using the right kind of tools and enabling folks to use the right tools while spreading that information or making that information more transparent and visible to the entire organization based on the perspective of that user is a real key strength. And I'm happy to hear that you're not trying to force one way or the other.
No, you said at the beginning, right? You really need to leverage the investment you already have, right? You don't want to have to throw anything out. Leverage what you have, make the most of that as you move forward. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Excellent. We have other questions coming in. Anybody else have questions? Feel free to type them into the question queue.
Let me jump in with a question here, Richard and Jack. What about an organization that is doing DevOps but doesn't know exactly what's next? Because DevOps covers many things: people, practices, culture, automation, measurement, metrics, all this. So, what steps should an organization take when trying to decide whether they are ready to adopt ServiceNow or if they should probably fix their process first? What is the path to follow in such a case?
I'll give you my first quick impression of that. So in terms of being ready to sort of add ServiceNow to a DevOps process, I think it does take a certain amount of DevOps maturity first. You need to be beyond like the initial one project experimentation stage. But as soon as you're starting to get to work with multiple teams and regularly delivering code through DevOps processes in those teams, then I think, even though it might be a small number of teams, you're getting ready to start connecting that to ServiceNow and getting the advantages of that kind of end-to-end insight, particularly as you're looking across teams. That's one scenario. Or if you're already fairly mature in DevOps and maybe you've got a fairly mature platform, working with a company recently that was all Azure DevOps, but they have hundreds of teams and they still face a problem of governance across those teams, as well as the kind of insights that they want to get, the visibility and performance across the teams as well. So, and in that case, what I would say, it's more about let's focus on a few teams to start with, that we might already have a pretty well-defined governance process around them, and let's look at how do we connect that and automate that and use that as a model then for the others. That's kind of where we've had the most success already so far.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard. And precisely, we would like to extend an invitation to everybody watching this broadcast and the recorded video once it goes live, to contact us for a free organizational DevOps capabilities assessment. If you want to understand how your organization is standing in terms of the DevOps capabilities you currently have in place, which are your strongest links in the chain, which are your largest opportunity areas, we can help you with the guidance of a consultant to perform a DevOps capabilities assessment using one of our proprietary tools, which is Matrix IT. Actually, our next event on March the 4th is going to be about how to perform a DevOps capabilities assessment. But if you're interested in having a consultant, even Jack, helping you with this assessment on-site in your organization, please contact us and we'll be happy to assist you. And also, if you want to get a full demo and a personalized interaction with ServiceNow to understand how the product works, please also reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to put you in contact with Richard, and he can assign someone to help you understand better how the DevOps product integrates with the rest of the suite from ServiceNow and the other tools that you already have in place. Thank you very much, guys, for this conversation. It has been very productive. I learned a lot. I hope our audience also learned a lot about this. We have this next event, as I was mentioning, on March the 4th. Jack is going to help us doing this demo on how to perform a DevOps capabilities assessment using Matrix IT. And also make sure that you enroll to our IT Live community. We'll be posting a lot of content here. We will keep inviting guests at the level of Richard and Jack. So hopefully we can all grow as a community and learn from each other from this forum. Thank you very much, Jack and Richard, for the conversation. And I look forward to seeing you in our next event.